New York Giants fans, I am excited and you should be excited because if you wanted to know anything about offensive rookies and rookies that might be playing for the Giants next year, rookies that might not just might, but probably will be playing for the Giants next year, I have one of the best in the business. You know, I swear by Emory Hunt. That's my guy. If I'm putting Emory Hunt as one, I'm putting this man 1B. That is Matt Waldman, the owner and the writer of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. He's here with me because I'm Coach Gene Clemons, and I have a Giant issue. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of A Giant Issue. I'm Coach Gene Clemons. New York Giants on SI. That's where you get all of your New York Giants news, information, everything. Go and check out all of the stuff that I'm writing over there. This should be out here. Colorado Pro Day is this afternoon. Everybody's going to be there. Shadeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, all of the other guys. We're going to talk about some of them today. But then also the entire Giants contingent is there. So go and see all the things that I'm writing over on New York Giants on SI about that. I just had an article about how to use Travis Hunter defensively in the different ways that they could use it. You'll also see a piece over there soon about all of the different players on that Colorado team that I believe could be a fit for the Giants. You're not going to want to miss it. Everything over there. And if you have some time while you're sitting here watching this or you're listening on your DSPs, go to the New York Giants on SI YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. Wherever you get your DSP from, wherever you're listening at, make sure you hit that follow, that subscribe. We really do appreciate it. That's how you pay your rent over here. We're not asking for your money. We're just asking for your loyalty. So without further ado, I want to bring in my guy, Matt Waldman, the owner and the writer of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Matt, I see some light. I love it. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's nice hearing about, I know Emory's your guy, so it's nice to be in that company. We're both Ross Tucker alums. So, it's fun to be able to be able to join you. And obviously you and I've done some work in the past. It's been great on some of my YouTube film rooms, and, much respect for you and your knowledge of the game. And I always love getting to come on and chop it up with you.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And I know that like anybody that does a draft guide, if you will, a rookie guide. I don't really want to call yours a draft guide. We talked about it. Yours kind of has a lot of tentacles when it comes to the different levels that it plays. But I know that it's a labor of love, right? Some of these other entities that have draft guides, they have staffs.
Right.
They have staffs and they have people who do a lot of the work, and then their name is just slapped on the front of it. But this is something that you dedicate yourself to pretty much the entire year. I'm assuming that once the draft hits, you'll make those necessary adjustments for the second part of your RSP, but then you're going to turn your attention to 2026. So just talk a little bit about how this came about and why this has been such a well-received piece that people in the draft world and people in the fantasy world seem to really, really adore.
Yeah, I mean, I started off my career in two ways. I was I was an operations manager who did a lot of work also in the quality sphere. And I worked for a 10,000 employee company where I was a director, basically in charge of performance measurement after a while. And I had to learn best practices on how to measure performance and how to do it to reduce variation in terms of how you record information and how you create criteria. And at the time, I was also doing a lot of freelance writing, and I got into fantasy football over the years, and I started writing about fantasy football back in the early 2000s, and realized after listening to Gil Brandt talk about a running back if he was 10 pounds heavier and 2 inches taller, he'd be a first top 5 overall pick, but he went to Villanova, tore his ACL a couple of times, and they felt like Brian Westbrook would probably drop a little bit lower. But I started thinking, well, I want to do something based on talent, not based on draft capital. I want to measure talent. And so I started applying a lot of this work that I did in that sphere of best practices with quality and operations management, and created a process for really evaluating talent, and also at the same time allowed me to build on that process, develop my football chops. So I've been doing this for 20 years. The RSP is basically there's a pre-draft guide and a post-draft guide. The pre-draft guide is really my unvarnished look at talent. I don't care about where they're going to get drafted. So if I liked Isaiah Crowell as the number one overall back in that draft class, or Nick Chubb over Saquon Barkley, which are two examples of that, even as much as I like them, or even Marshawn Lynch slightly ahead of Adrian Peterson, but still thinking all the guys that they were ahead of were great. I can write that and I can explain why and show you the work and give you film clip examples and show you my criteria and walk you through it in an entertaining way. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure PDF where you get 165 prospects at those four positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And you get about 1,200 pages of material, and it sounds like a lot, but you can navigate it very easily. I don't expect you to read it all the way through, though some people do and find it entertaining, but you can bop around to the scouting reports, the rankings, how I break players down with specific things. And people find they go back to it for years when they hear about a player who lands on their team who was an undrafted free agent and has bounced around the league, and suddenly they're going, oh, I want to learn about this guy. And then from a fantasy perspective, I give you a much more concise book a week after the draft that gives you cheat sheets and gives you the difference between where, like, I may have said Nick Chubb's my number one overall back in that class, even though Saquon was great. I could then, when he gets drafted by the Browns and Carlos Hyde's in place and he's playing special teams early on, I can still say, I still believe Nick Chubb is the most talented back, but based on average draft position, I can tell you that here's the sweet spot where you can get him. You're not drafted at number one overall. You can draft him 35th and get the value of a guy who, if he hits, you got extreme value because you probably got Saquon and you could have gotten Nick Chubb. So I give you that kind of work, and the RSP is one of the two most looked at draft guides, according to guys like Alex Brown, who's the recruiting, who's in recruiting at Ole Miss and who was the recruiting head at SMU and at Houston and Rice. And he gets to meet with scouts and they talk about whose work that they buy as a cross-checking device. So I've been fortunate over the 20 years to have that and do some work with some quarterback coaches and some wide receiver people. I've submitted scouting reports for Brock Purdy pre-draft to Will Hewlett, who also works with Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams. And I've done work with those guys as for them as well on those players. So it's a draft guide in the sense of it's a football evaluation talent. And then I give you a fantasy focus on top of it. You can find it at mattwaldman.com.
Yeah, and shout out to you, by the way, because I remember when Chubb was coming out, I liked Sony Michel over Chubb. I was on Sony Michel. I thought at the beginning his landing spot was better. I thought the way that they were going to use him in New England was perfect for his skill set, which out the gate we were good, but then we saw what happened when they finally said, maybe we should put this Nick Chubb guy in. And the rest was history. He went bananas. With that though, I want to get into some Giant stuff because I love the fact that you focus in on the offensive skill position guys. I think a lot of people, and there's some people who do fantastic work, right? Who can evaluate every position. But I think it's refreshing when someone says, hey, I've identified the positions that I myself have the ability to be able to evaluate the best. So why even bore you or bug you with this other stuff that I might just not be as sharp on? I'm going to focus all my attention on getting better and becoming like a master at this, and then giving this to you. And I think that's what you've done a great job of. You're not trying to be the dude that comes on and says that he knows everything about every position, that he's an expert on every position, but you've really honed it down to these four positions that you feel you have an extremely good grasp on. So out the gate, I want to talk about quarterbacks, obviously, because the Giants are in a situation where a lot of people want them to either try to maneuver their way up to get a guy like Cam Ward, who people believe has emerged as the consensus number one overall pick, or they want they want they want a guy like um, a guy like Shadeur Sanders to maybe fall to them or trade down and still be able to get them. And then there are some people who are looking at those possible day two guys in Jayden Milroe and Jackson Dart. Tell me where you are on the quarterbacks this year. How do you feel about them? Do you think that they play pretty well with all of those quarterbacks that were taken last year that had success in the NFL? How are you looking at this class, and more specifically about which one you think might be best suited for a role in New York?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, start off from the landscape from this year compared to last year. Last year, I felt like there was one quarterback who I felt like you can put him in a bad organization early on as the top pick. And even if the organization sets itself on fire, this guy is probably going to survive the onslaught and they can build off of him. And that was Caleb Williams. That was my feeling, is like, even if he went on a team where they didn't have prescribed dropbacks for him all the time, and that they were using DJ Moore in a position in a role that he wasn't used to being in, and maybe the routes weren't perfect from what you had seen in the past, and that he was getting pressured all the time, he was going to be able to work through that. And even when Thomas Brown came in and said, okay, let's do some emergency work surgery here, and let's get DJ Moore in a spot where we don't have to, we let maximize what he does rather than what we were trying to get all these guys to do. And maybe Caleb has, shorter throws earlier, so he's not beaten up by the third quarter, and he can do some of the things that we saw at USC because he's not as tired from getting worn down. And then you see the jump in production when that happened. He was that guy. And then I looked at a bunch of the other guys are more comparable to what I'm seeing this year. Like, I like Michael Penix a little more than most people, and I thought he was borderline in that area. I thought Bo Nix was also borderline. Like, give him a good offense, and he was my number 3 guy, and I felt like, give him a good offense, and he does more than people realize. Like, I think this could work. And then the rest of the guys I felt were more within this range of, like, they could start for a team, but you're either going to need an offense that really can play to that player's strengths and let them get off to a good start early, and then they can really shine. Jayden Daniels is a good example of that. And then there are some guys that you're just going to be like, they're going to have to suffer a little bit. Drake May is going to have to suffer a little bit, and you're going to see some flashes, but you're going to see some things where you're going to say it's going to need more work, and don't get too excited yet. We're going to need 18 to 30 games for some things to be structured in. And I think this is a class that's a lot like that, where, like, you put them in some of these guys, if they get a good landing spot, I think that they can show you flashes of really strong skill this year, but there's going to be things that they clearly need to work on, and they may need more infrastructure to help them out. But most of them, just from my philosophical standpoint, I like to see these guys sit, not because they don't know football or that they have skills that they need to work on, because most coaches aren't developing players in the NFL. Most coaches are coaching to scheme and game plan. And so, when you're a young man and you're getting into the league, your bandwidth is taken up now, because now you're going to a league where there's a lot more freedom for you to do what you want to do and how you want to do it. You've got things you need to work on, things you don't know yet you need to work on. Plus, you're learning a playbook that's a lot bigger. The media is paying much more attention to you, even more, even if you were a star somewhere else. You've got more demands on you. Maybe as NIL changes things, you're going to see that players get more used to having money and what that means. But you've got a lot more things that are spreading you thinner. And also, now you're supposed to manage grown men who now their mortgages and their families depend on how you perform. And as Ben Watson told me one time, he was like, yeah, when I went to New England, he said, I played at Duke, I played at Georgia, and I've been in big stadiums and done that ACC and SEC. But my first game, in the locker room before we went on the field and seeing how players were. I realized these were grown men who were supporting their families, and it's a different kind of pressure. And so, these players, Patrick Mahomes didn't need to sit because he needed to learn how to play football or not take as many risks. Patrick Mahomes benefited from sitting because he could watch a guy who was not as talented as him, but had more experience, how you manage bad situations. How do you help manage your team in football situations that the coach wants? How do you prepare for your game plan? How do you deal with the media? How do you operate in a quarterback room and lead people in this particular environment? And just kind of, and also have time to take a breath and just keep focusing on the things you need to keep learning. And now you're not forgetting things that you already knew because you're thrust on the field too early. And I think that for me, a lot of these guys need that. It's about being young man thrust into being in a leadership role and how to handle all those facets versus whether they know how to execute a 5-step drop or whether or not they can, read the cloud safety or they can read different types of coverages. Those things come and go based on the disguises and the savvy of their opposition. They can get acclimated to that as long as that it's not all done at once. And now they're putting too much pressure on themselves. So like looking at guys, yeah, go ahead.
No. I was about to say, one of the things that I'll tell you, and you can respond. I said, and I've been on record as saying that I think Shadeur Sanders is the most pro-ready quarterback to come out in the last 15 to 20 years. I got a lot of blowback on it because everybody went immediately to like skills, right? And those measurables of being a quarterback. And none of what I said had anything to do with what he does on the field. It had everything to do with how he's been raised. Like He's been raised like a professional. He's had money for a very long time. He's not going to come into the NFL and all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, I get to buy this, I get to buy that. He's got 8 cars now, right? Yeah. Like he's got everything. He's got jewelry. He's one of the best looking quarterbacks that you've ever seen come out. And that includes all of the chiseled jaw white guys that have come out in the past that just have the world as their oyster because they're chiseled jawed and they're white and they play quarterback. But Shadeur Sanders and Shiloh Sanders as well, they are the sons of Deion Sanders and a supermodel, right? Like they are good looking dudes. So this guy is not going to come into the league and be surprised by anything when it comes to that standpoint. He also has a Hall of Famer who understands glitz and glamour and how to navigate that in his father, who is as new school / old school as they come. A lot of the way he carries himself and his persona is new school. All of his core beliefs and values are all old school core beliefs and values. And so I looked at that and said, that to me makes him the most pro-ready, regardless of his skill set, which I think is actually a lot higher than what a lot of people will give him credit for.
I know, I love that take. And I think that's a really valid, because from the standpoint of skill-wise, I mean, he fits in there with some of the top 5 guys from last year for sure on a skill standpoint, in terms of how he sees the field, how he recovers from mistakes, and can he look at something that he got confused by or somebody confused him, and can he come back and not make the same mistake twice in the game? Yeah, he does that well. He maneuvers a pocket well. He's got accuracy. The arm strength is certainly there. The maneuverability and to be able to throw and, reset and fire, all that stuff's there. A lot of what you're looking for from a good player. But the ability to handle the bandwidth of everything there, that makes total sense. And you're right, because I mean, look, I can tell a funny story about waiting tables for Deion Sanders after he got arrested literally down the street from my from where I was living at a Kroger, and I can tell you that the Duluth, Georgia Police Department was overzealous. He was parking in a fire lane to get medicine for his for I think it was his wife at the time, or a girlfriend who was pregnant, and it was midnight. Nobody was there. He just did what most people do. They parked in the fire lane, put the hazards on, and the police officer arrested him after he tried to have a conversation with them about all of that. And I remember, like, you see what he's been through, stuff that athletes go through, from the really good to things like that, and the kind of media attention that you get from that. Because I waited on him a week after that, and he came into a place with a couple of teammates, and you could tell he was pretty hot about everything that was going on with him, and felt like people were, felt like he felt a little bit of a target, and he felt and understandably angry about a lot of that. But the point being is, he's had these experiences, the highs and the lows, and his son gets to see that. And he's had the ability to take that perspective and the maturity that he's gained and the knowledge that he's gained on and off the field. And he's been able to give his sons the opportunity to see some of that. Something that they're going to have to experience themselves, but they've already gotten an early taste, like you said, gotten an early taste with the environment with college football as it is. So that adjustment's going to be good for him. Is his ceiling maybe as high? Maybe not quite as high as maybe some of the other guys that we talk about. You can have that debate and say, yeah, maybe not. But at the same time, let's say this, stylistically, if I were to style, not like talent wise, but just style of how he plays. If I were to say a Geno Smith or a Tua Tagovailoa were guys that maybe in body type, maybe in certain ways, that certain things that they do well, and that they do are some of those things Shadeur can do well like them, and say stylistically they're maybe in the same town, maybe not the same zip code, depending on which one you like more or less. Maybe you could say that, and maybe those got, but I would say that with, say, both of those players, they were a little overwhelmed at the beginning. One of them had a coach who was very old school in a bad way, maybe, who just kind of was like, if it's true, was, Brian Flores maybe saying, hey, you're bad, I don't want you, kind of just not being as encouraging of a coach. Whereas, McDaniel kind of embraced him. And then with Geno Smith maybe had to get a taste of what the professional life was going to be like. And then, because it didn't work out early for him, he was in purgatory for a while, but he made the most of that. I think Shadeur is going to avoid most of all of that noise, and that means, yeah, he could be on the field sooner than later.
Do you think so? So for you, Shadeur and Cam Ward, they're right in the same grouping as all of those guys, except for Caleb Williams for you from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're all in that tier, and I'd throw Jayden Milroe into that mix. I'm a big Milroe fan, so yeah.
So, because one of my biggest things is when people try to use revisionist history, and that's why I appreciate you saying that Caleb Williams was your guy that you thought was anywhere he could be good. I actually don't think that his rookie season takes any of what you said away, because if you look at what he dealt with, he's still standing. He's still strong, right? He's still here, even though it wasn't pretty, even though it didn't look good. But then it also makes me go, so you guys looked at that, right? You looked at that and you say, oh, woe is me, or poor Caleb Williams, but you don't have any sympathy for Justin Fields,
right?
They actually believed in Caleb Williams, and that's what they did to him.
Yes,
they
exactly.
didn't believe in Justin Fields. So imagine how much worse it was for him. I digress. So those guys, Milroe, you talked about, a lot of people very disrespectfully don't think Milroe can throw. And my problem with that is, you can't tell me that a guy can't throw when I just watched him carve up the best defense in all of college football 2 years in a row. 2 years in a row, Jayden Milroe's only game he was able to throw was the game when he was playing the best defense in the world? Like, what are we doing here? It makes zero sense. What are your thoughts on Jayden Milroe? Where do you believe he has to improve in order to kind of reach, maybe not even reach his ceiling, but to get to a level of consistency that's going to allow all of the other talents that we know are just, you can't even like dispute them to take over?
Well, I mean, I think really the thing that stands out the most is probably not as huge of a deal, but I think he can be a little bit better with what your Giants fans are going to see, which is the moon ball that Russell Wilson throws on deeper routes, on fades, being able to drop the ball in with touch. I think that that's an area where when you watch Milroe, he has the most compact release of any receiver or of any quarterback I have seen, honestly, since Dan Marino. Like, it is the most compact I've seen. His dropbacks are great. And it's just unbelievably quick. He looks like he's throwing a javelin in the deep game. I mean, it's just like, it's a beautiful thing to watch. What I want to see is maybe
you think it's better than Michael Penix's? Because Penix is, I mean,
Penix is a sweet. Yeah,
the
it's
way
great.
that he releases is chef's kiss out there.
It's up there. It's up there.
Okay.
I just think
Right.
that the difference is that with Penix has touch, like in the vertical ranges,
Okay.
whereas Milroe maybe needs to angle up the body a little bit, get his feet where he needs to work on the mechanics so that he can drop the ball so it comes down and he gets the top of the ball coming down a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's having certain honey hole shots are a little more difficult for him. Certainly the fade routes can be a little more difficult for him at times where he's throwing it more on a line. Okay. Yeah. But when it comes to the thing that to me that's more important than all of that, because that's a mechanical thing you can work out, I think, with work. The thing that's more important that is hard to coach once you get to this level, and you've got to show signs of it now or you're never going to have it, is how you process information on the field. Not on a test, not on a whiteboard, but when it's coming down. And you've talked about the Georgia game. And I saw a play, and I've seen multiple plays like this with him, but the Georgia game stands out the most, that no one in this class was able to do something comparable to this. And it's really dense with skills that you want to see from a player. And they were running a mesh concept where you've got receivers working across the field in opposite directions towards each other. And he drops back on that play, and there's pressure coming off of his, I believe it's off of his right side, over the right guard. And there's a bull rush coming. He drops back initially. He's got very strong drops and good quiet feet in the pocket, the ability to just make small maneuvers. He's not dropping his head, pulling the ball back, making jump cuts and spins and all of that. He's keeping his eyes downfield. And he drops back. He looks off. His first read's to his right, the receiver to the right. And he comes off of that, and he knows the mesh is starting to intersect, and he's got the middle linebacker sitting in there, and he's got to move that middle linebacker for him to be able to hit the mesh receiver on time before the bull rush gets into his lap. And most quarterbacks, we say, oh, they manipulate. You hear a lot of guys say that, and they're just talking about the bare minimum of looking off the deep safety during the second and third steps of their drop, and then they don't even manipulate it long enough. It's hard to manipulate middle of the field defenders. And Milroe's the only quarterback I saw in this class consistently be able to end of his drop, standing there in the pocket, knowing he's got a 300-pounder pushing his guard into his lap, be able to go, okay, time to look off the linebacker late and hold that linebacker. And in the minute that linebacker moves 2 steps to the left, he's already turned and thrown the ball. You know, it's not like, oh, he turned. Who's open over here? That's not what he's doing. It's, I'm waiting for him to do that. The minute he does, I'm pivoting and throwing. And he's very good at being able to quickly make the move so that he can throw an accurate ball. And he did that repeatedly in a way that I saw nobody else in this class do in that range of the field in the scenario with pressure. So the fact that he can manage a pocket, the fact that he can manipulate defenders, that he can go through multiple reads, and that he can do it in a quick fashion with tight people around him. Sure, he can't throw a fade route as well as I would like to see right now. Sure, maybe the offense that you're asking to do maybe it's not as expansive as some of the other offenses that teams would say that they feel that way. I don't know. But I know that what he does well, he does at a level of mastery that's harder to teach when you get in there. Alex Smith knew lots of stuff, but he was as slow as an economist at predicting what was going to happen on the field, and he was always late throwing the ball because he was great at the test and at the whiteboard. But when it came to, I know how to manipulate and when to get the ball out with great time, and I'm going to stand in there and do it. Very different type of skill sets, and Milroe has that, and that's high level processing. So I'd rather build on a quarterback who can do that and then also run in the open field like Matt Forte when he needs to.
Yeah.
I think I'd work with that.
I just don't understand when people try to use that as a diss. Oh, well, he's a running back. He is like so you're telling me that he's been able to do everything that he was able to do as a quarterback, but because he has the ability to run like a running back, that's a diss? I don't quite know if you understand how the game works, ladies and gentlemen. Like, the more you can do is not a negative. The more you can do is a positive, especially at that position where everybody's running 4.4 and 4.5 40s on defensive line now, right? Like that's what you need a lot of these times. If you don't have those other things,
especially when you're selective about, and especially when you're selective about when to do it with the right management and judgment on the field, and that's what he does well, and that's what top quarterbacks do well.
It's one of the interesting things I think about Shadeur when he gets to the league. Everyone is like, oh, well, he takes a lot of sacks. I'm like, no, he's holding the ball in order to allow people to like work more. He's not taking the easy cheese. There's a lot of times he could have just taken the easy throw, but he's not taking the easy throw. He's trying to wait for the better throw, which is interesting because people will go, oh, well, he only has a high completion percentage because he throws a bunch of like screen passes. I'm like, clearly you have not watched the film. Clearly that's not what you see, because the guys that they wanted to throw screen passes to, Travis Hunter and Horn, Jimmy Horn Jr. Jimmy Horn Jr. was out for over half the season. Travis Hunter missed games through the season. So they weren't the ones getting all of these like mythical screen passes. He was throwing the ball to Will Shepherd in a window that only Will Shepherd could adjust and grab the ball. He was throwing the ball to LeJohntay Wester in places where only Wester could get the ball. Like, these weren't happenstances, just that he knew what he was doing. Speaking of those, like the Colorado Pro Day is today. For people who are wondering, we're recording this right after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The Colorado Pro Day is today. I believe that there are several players on this Colorado team offensively, like from the skill positions, that could be in play for for the Giants. Number one above of them, outside of Travis Hunter and Shadeur Sanders, is Will Shepherd. 6'3", 200 plus pounds, explosive. Like, I think people always get enamored with the speed, but I am really more on the explosion than I am on the speed, especially when we're talking about X receivers, right? Explosive. A darn near 11-foot broad jumper, a 40-plus inch vertical guy. And when you look at the film, I can see all that explosiveness on film. What do you think about a guy like Will Shepherd?
He's fun because, when you look at what's available for him, he can help a team immediately as a zone receiver early in his career, just from the standpoint that he's someone, because he can use his length, because he can use that explosion to separate late or to be able to win targets where you're going to use the boundary as your friend, or to be thrown open. He's good with that. And then I'd say once he just tightens up some of his work with his breaks, or add a little bit nuance to his setups with coverage during his stems, I think you're seeing someone who has the skills at the catch point to have value as a flanker or a slot flanker hybrid who can win matchups against man. And you can also put him outside, as you described, because of the explosion that he has. I think that while I didn't see great skill after the catch from the viewings I had on film, what he does to exploit holes in zone or in routes where he's breaking across the field, he can be quite valuable in that respect. I mean, you see Michael Pittman get that kind of work across the field, and you can see how Shepard could easily do a lot of the things there, and that would be very helpful. And it's not like he's not, that he's not good enough to run good routes. I mean, like, I think that he just needs to have a little more nuance. Like, I want to see him sell the peak at the top of his stem just a little longer. Maybe the stair step isn't quite long enough in terms of using the stair step concept of, baiting the over the top safety or the linebackers in terms of how you're setting up those zone routes to get better at that. And with breaks, I'd say, his speed breaks are flat. He's got the tight drive step. He's got that line step that works well. He snaps his turns, which a lot of young receivers don't do as well as they should. And he already does that well. So I think that, showing maybe that he can drop his weight a little bit better with some of the harder breaks that you have to have against man-to-man coverage on timing routes. That's where his game could get more complete. But yeah, certainly, like, think about Jawan Jennings, who wasn't fast, but certainly was explosive enough to do the work that he does and very good at the catch point. I think that there's guys like that, or Michael Clayton back in the day with Tampa Bay, and, you think about Michael Clayton and you go, not super fast, but he was explosive enough to be able to get downfield, get early separation, and win.
I think the thing that I think separates him from a lot of those guys and maybe guys that are like him is how quick his hands are. He has very quick hands. If you ever notice, I think he's a contested ball, receiver. I don't think he's ever going to be the get into the open field type of dude. I think he's a contested ball, 13 to 15 yards a catch type of guy. But the thing that he does really, really well is he'll see the ball coming. And at the last second, he has the ability to flash those hands quick and snatch them before the defensive back has an opportunity to make a play, because we know that the defensive back is looking at the hands. They're looking at the arms. They're trying to see him react to the ball on the way. And he does a really good job of selling, hey, the ball's not coming yet. Boom, I got it. You're too late. Right? That's why he was so good in the red zone for Colorado this year, and for Vanderbilt all of those years that he was with Vandy, going up against guys that you're going to see him play against in the pros. So I'm really bullish on him, especially if I see him start to drop, right? Like if we get out of day 2, which there's a strong possibility that we get out of day 2 because of how many excellent running backs there are this year, I think that pushes the wide receivers down. And we could get into day 3, round 4, and still see guys like Will Shepard on the board. Whereas in some other drafts where the running backs weren't so heavy, you would see him probably go a little bit earlier. We could see him drop to round 4, unless he goes out there in his pro day and goes sub 4.5. Then somebody's going to get him in round 3 for sure, at the worst. But if he's a day 3 pick for you, you have a potential starter or a high rep getter in day 3. To me, that's a win for you in your war room, if that's who you're bringing into the fold. And a team like New York needs a bigger body wide receiver. They just don't have a lot of those, on the team right now.
And one of the things that makes him viable as a big receiver at the boundary and a ball winner is a technique that he shows very well, because you talked about his tracking with his late hands to get to flash the hands late. The other thing that's very important with good pass tracking like that is how do you time your jump up and throughs, your jump backs for the ball on fades and on back shoulders and on underthrown balls? Now there's a lot of guys out there. Now, the Giants fans are familiar with Colin Johnson, who was the Texas receiver who came through Jacksonville. At one point at Texas, he was considered a high-end prospect by the media. When you watch, and there's a lot of layers to players' games that make a difference. This is just one layer. But one of the things that I noticed with him that was fascinating was that you see all that height and length, and he's a big dude, and he was always late to attack the ball on those plays, and late not in a good way, because you want to leap early enough on a jump up and through that you are leaping straight up and down, because then your back is to the defender and you're literally boxing him out. But what oftentimes these guys do, and Johnson was a big time guy like that, he would leap late and he had to angle his body back. And now his chest and his pads and his hands are all exposed to that defender, because the defender has an easier time reaching through to get rid of the ball. And you can't land on your feet, so you have worse control near the boundary to keep your feet in bounds. And you're not going to have any shot of being able to run after the catch. And when you land, now you have to embrace the fall and roll through so that you protect the ball. So there's a lot more you got to do that you didn't have to if you could just jump straight up and down. And Will Shepherd's good at that. And that tracking is good to do that. And a lot of guys aren't good. And that's helpful, because at his size, it makes it even more effective for him to win. Because guys like Stephon Diggs, the reason they were great, or Steve Smith were great, is that they could do the jump up and through straight up and down. And whereas some of the taller guys who jump late, it just destroys the height advantage and length advantage that they had. So it's kind of like the quarterbacks who are tall, but the way that they throw or see things and they're late to do it, they still have a lot of tip passes at the line, where shorter guys that people got worried about, they don't have as many tip passes, so.
The other two receivers that have gotten a lot of fanfare, more fanfare than Will Shepherd has gotten. That's why I really wanted to spend the time talking about Shepherd for a minute. LaJohntay Wester and Jimmy Horn Jr. Now, it's interesting enough, right? Because when you hear those names, the first thing you'll hear people say is Jimmy Horn Jr. is a speedster. He's a burner. And LaJohntay Wester is a route god, right? And that's cool. And then you watch him play, and you'll watch Jimmy Horn Jr. just absolutely just cook somebody, on a route. And you'll watch LaJohntay Wester just blow by someone, for a deep pass. Have we undersold them by trying to pigeonhole them into a box where they're looked at as only one thing? Or do you think that that's a fair assessment for them, Jimmy Horn being that speedster and LaJohntay Wester being a guy who's really just going to be a shifty Wes Welker-esque type of guy?
Well, I mean, I think that oftentimes what people do is that they try to get the Cliff Notes version of what they're scouting by looking at the role that the player has, and not what the player can do. And a good example of that in the past was a Detroit Lions receiver who originally got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. I remember watching this guy at the Senior Bowl, and again, even All-Star game practices have a lot of limitations. You want to watch the tape, but I remember watching Marvin Jones Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching him and seeing him before Keenan Allen came to town and some of the other guys came to town, and he was their deep threat at Cal. And I'd watch him routinely beat press cornerbacks and go, this guy's a really good deep threat. How come nobody's talking about him? Because when the draft community got around, a lot of them got around to looking at Marvin Jones Jr. He was being used as their flanker and their possession receiver in that Cal offense. And then suddenly they were shocked because there was a good set of cornerbacks that year at the Senior Bowl, and he was wiping the floor with all of them in press man drills. And they weren't the two-way go variety. They had him at the boundary, and he was literally wiping the mat with them. And it was because none of the people who were surprised had seen him operate in a different role. If you had seen him in the different role, you would have understood. And so I think that's can be the case with these guys. With Wester, certainly, I can see how he could get comped to a Wandale Robinson or Ray McLeod type of player, who I think both those guys, especially McLeod, you can see a little bit more of that vertical ability, and that skill set to be able to win outside and inside and do a little bit more work in that sense. I've seen him be able to at least show that he can stack defenders and be able to control the pace of defensive backs, early in routes. I've seen some ability to do that. He shows some ability to really run some decent setups, get defenders, in his rearview mirror and then set them up further because of what he's doing there. I'd like to see him maybe get a little bit better with his breaks. I think that's going to be helpful to him and going to need to be something that helps him to get separation against man-to-man coverage. But yes, if you're going to go with the quick, easy scouting with him, you can say, yeah, of course he's going to be good running those slow developing crossing routes at various depths where you can get him into open space, and he's going to easily beat those guys. But yeah, I think there's a little bit more to his game. I just want to see, I think the refinement where he's going to have to do that is sometimes he leaves his feet unnecessarily on throws above his head, and he can waste movement and time to get downhill on certain plays where you'd like to see that get better. And he's a little prone to the clap attacking. His hands can get too wide when he has to extend beyond his frame, and then he's clapping onto the ball, and it leads to him finding some targets that he shouldn't be. But these are things, again, that are correctable. You just have to work on them and know that those are things that you can do. So, I think a guy that I felt like could be they're both similar players to me because they can both give you a little bit inside outside to me. And so, like for Jimmy Horn, I look at him and I go, a player I really liked and I liked more than Wandale Robinson was Calvin Austin at Memphis, who played over at Pittsburgh. And you can see what Russell Wilson did with him a little bit in moments where I thought somebody needed to, which was say, we could use this guy a little more downfield. He could be a little bit more of a Doug Baldwin type or a Tyler Lockett type to a degree, and he can win some of these vertical routes for you. And I think that Horn and Wester have the potential to be in that Calvin Austin type of archetype, even though fans might look at the results of that right now and go, what's he talking about? But if you think more to Lockett and Baldwin, that's the easy way to look at it and say that's what Matt's really referring to.
Yeah. So with that, because I want to get you out of here. There's a need on the Giants. I know that people are like, oh, Tyrone Tracy had a really good rookie season. It was cool, right? He wasn't bad. I don't like backs that put the ball on the ground as much as he put the ball on the ground, especially in some critical situations. But I'm not mad at him. I also do know that this is a league where you need more than one. I think that the Giants are in need of a bigger body back to be able to handle a little bit more of the short yardage and maybe goal line type of thing. But also in this draft, I think you can find a guy who's going to be able to give you more than just that. If you had a back that you think would be perfect to just drop into that Giants offense, what back do you believe would be one that would fit really well in that offense of what you've seen them do?
Sure. And in that role, you're talking specifically or
just in general? It doesn't have to be that role, but if it's that role or if it's just a back, you're like, hey, listen, I don't really know about a big back, but this dude, if you put him into that Tyrone Tracy role, he's going crazy. Or, hey, this guy would be a really good compliment in a backfield by committee type of situation.
All right. So if we're going to do a committee, I'm going to do a committee and then the guy that I think can do both. The committee guy who could do the role you described and then just take over if you need him to take over and want him to, is Damian Martinez out of Miami and from Oregon State. This guy breaks tackles. He understands how to run through tight creases and set up defenders. He has very efficient feet and hips, the ability to open the hips quickly, and he puts moves on guys in the open field with efficiency that's really underrated. He's going to run through reach wraps and hits for you. He can catch the ball and track the ball fine as a check down receiver, elite guy, screens, things like that. Promising pass protector. And he's got more of that smooth accelerator than you would expect. You watch him at Oregon State, and you'll understand that watching all that outside zone and those toss plays that he ran to great effect. Now, he doesn't have a lot of the receiving skills on tape of the box score that people look at. But when you study the tape, you understand you didn't get a lot of opportunities at Oregon State because when you're running play action off of wide zone and toss plays, guess who everybody's flowing to? So you're not throwing to him. You're using him as the decoy. But at Miami, you could see where he got thrown to a little bit more, and he showed the skill there. The guy that I love in this class that more people are talking about now, I think, but I liked him since last year, and I've been talking about him a lot. I joke that his nickname for me is Lemonade because he's turned more lemons into lemonade than any back in this class, if you ask me. And that's Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech. He's 5'9", 214. He might have played at 230. He reminded me a little bit of Le'Veon Bell and Frank Gore in the respect of that when you look at the body type and you look at the footwork and the short area explosion, the acceleration and short area quickness, change of direction, it was elite. You could see it on the field. He turned more bad plays into positive gains or mitigated losses. And loss mitigation is a very important part of running back play in the NFL because you can look at Kenyon Drake and late career Frank Gore as a good example. Kenyon Drake was a player who didn't understand how to mitigate loss early in his career, and he'd lose 5-7 yards on plays, and now the playbook has basically had to be abandoned of what they're trying to do to stay on schedule. Late career Frank Gore still had the feet, the vision, the decision-making maturity, and the quickness to turn a 7-yard loss into a 5-yard gain, or a 5-yard loss into a 15-yard gain because of his ability to understand scheme and to be able to create. And Taj Brooks does that well. He can run through you. He can run around you. And he was faster than I thought with the long speed. And maybe that's because he lost the weight. He cringes at hearing comparisons to Le'Veon Bell. I think that has to do with the off the field. He likes to say, I've watched a lot of Josh Jacobs. Well, to me, Josh Jacobs and Frank Gore have a lot of similarities to their games. So I'm just a little more older school, and I'm a University of Miami matriculate. So I would say that from that standpoint, Brooks can catch. He's a pretty good blocker. I think he can get better at it, and he's shown flashes of being really strong. You don't see a lot of backs be able to punch and roll through their hips and be able to stop guys like that with that type of technique without overextending. And he does that well in moments that you can see he can build on. So Brooks, to me, is that late round guy. You might be able to sign him as an undrafted free agent, and he can work his way up the roster if he doesn't get drafted. Martinez might be a 5th round guy who you end up looking at and going, yeah, we pair him with Tyrone Tracy, and that's going to be nice. And then you get enough from Martinez, and you go, we can let someone else sell Tyrone at the end of his contract and let them pay him. We'll keep Martinez.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going that route, if you think that the value is to get running backs late, which that seems to be where the Giants have kind of turned their thing to, I think 3 years in a row they've picked up a 5th round running back. And so if that's what they're thinking and just saying, hey, we're going to hit on one of these guys eventually, if we just take one every year, then that could definitely be the way. I like both of those call outs though, as far as running backs. I also think when we look at what this team has in place, I'm just not a big fan of their tight ends. Like, and not necessarily even just because I don't think either one of them have like receiving ability to a level that I think you need in the NFL now. Neither one of them are impressive blockers. And so it's like, how do you have these bodies that look so phenomenal, but y'all don't move a soul when you're blocking anyone. And obviously both are still young. One is just going into year number 2. The other one's going into year number 4. Like, so it's not like they've played a ton, but
Right.
you kind of know it at tight end, right? Especially when
Yeah.
it comes to the ability to be a weapon as a pass receiver. What's a guy that you would say probably is going to be a day 3 guy, because that's where they've been taking tight ends, that the Giants might look to and say, hey, this guy is more of what we're looking for as a pass receiver? And how far down do you think Harold Fannin is going to drop, because everybody is now talking about him not being fast?
Okay.
Like,
Well,
let's roll
yes.
the dice. Like,
Yeah, this is going to be
how
fun.
long can I wait for Harold Fannin because people are stupid?
Right. I love it, because to me, Harold Fannin is the same guy that Sam Laporta is.
Yes.
And if you look at the numbers, it's pretty much the same. And I would argue that Fannin, has the differences between them are few and far between, and with the right fit, Fannin could absolutely deliver as much or more production than Sam Laporta has as a receiver. And he shows some ability to at least be a kind of a blocker that you can use as an H-back and a wing,
Yeah.
as that
You don't
second
want to
guy.
put him on, you don't want to put him in line though. Like,
No,
that's just a
not at
waste of
all.
time. But
Not
I
at
think
all.
you're right. He could do some things. I don't want him to, but he could do
Yeah.
some things as a blocker.
Yeah, you want him as a receiver. He can work the middle of the field really well. He has good snap with routes. I think that there's a lot to like about him. And yes, I think you're going to be able to get him in day 3. And I laugh about the roller coaster of that. If there's some guys that you might be able to get day 3 that can be a better receiver than you would expect, but also can work in line if you needed them to, the guy that's the most intriguing to me is the Nebraska kid, Thomas Fidone II, because
Yep.
he was like in the 250s, and you watch him block and you go like, okay, this guy can handle in line, but he had torn his ACL. And I think he gamed the combine like a lot of these guys have to do. And
Yeah.
he lost the weight and measured in at 243. And he then ran like a 4.740, 4.2620, 7.01 3-cone drone. And when you watch him on tape, even without the weight loss, I thought pretty explosive short area to be able to run routes. And he's a good route runner. So did he lose the weight because it's easier on his knees and he wants to highlight being the receiver because that's where the money is? Or did he lose the weight just to game the system and he's going to gain it back if they ask him to and be more of the big inline guy? But either way, to me, he's kind of like a more athletic version of what Pat Fryermuth has been. And I like Pat Fryermuth. I thought
Mm-hmm.
he was probably the only tight end at Penn State that I watched that I felt was worth the hype coming out pre-draft relative to who he is. Not that those other guys weren't NFL players, but I thought Fryermuth was a more complete tight end. And I think that Fidone is one of those guys that could give you some of that. And then maybe if I'm going to give you a sleeper for me, and it's his hands are good, but they got to get better. He clap attacks some things. When he has to extend, his hands are apart rather than together when he extends. And that can be a problem fighting the ball. But I like Gavin Bartholomew out of Pitt. I kind of think that he can give you that Cade Otton kind of thing as a player. That
Okay.
might be something there. And then the guy that I would say, let's just take a chance because this dude can block, but he's might be one of the best blockers in the class. But if we can get enough out of his hands, he might be like a higher end version of Tucker Kraft. Would be the former Yale Georgia Tech kid Jackson Hawes. That dude can block. I think he's the best blocker in the class. And if his receiving game is decent, he can. He's not superbly fast, but he's quick. So I think he'd be an upgrade to Daniel Bellinger, like if the hands worked out. So those are some guys that just kind of from various levels that I would point out would be good. I think Elijah Arroyo, if he fell, but I think his speed will probably get him higher, and he's got some things to work on. Like I think he's got the high end talent, but he's got some things to shore up, and I don't think you're going to plug him in right away and it's going to work. How about you? You're a tight end guy, so who are some of the guys?
My problem with Arroyo is I have a problem when people have looked like he's looked for as long as he's looked that way and not emerged as a real legitimate receiving threat. Like, don't tell me, oh, well, there's so many different options, right? Because if you're the option, if you're him, they're going to throw you the ball. Quarterbacks aren't stupid, right? There's a reason why Cam Ward is throwing all of these balls to a 5'7", 205-pound like Oompa Loompa who runs a 4.8
right?
Like, and not throwing it to this 6'3", 6'4" Adonis, right? Like, I don't know. It's just something about how he's played that I'm just like, if I don't see the production, how can I project that production at the next level when you're playing all the time? It's not a situation where he's not playing. I'm bigger on Fannin than most people are because I think that people take 40 times into consideration way too much when it comes to like how you play football. So for me, a lot of people are coasting Loveland once they think coasting Loveland is due. Other people are Warren one. I think Warren is the guy for me in this draft, and I like Loveland, but I also think that there's a part of Gunnar Helm that has been like destroyed because he had an absolutely atrocious, combine. I'm sitting there watching him like, why is he out here? Like, why is he performing right now? But Gunnar Helm is one of the best blockers in the draft, but also a legitimate receiver. So he's going to get some initial bump because I think he'll be on the field as a blocker, like as someone who can put body on body and get movement. I think that helps him to be able to get on the field faster, where people will go, oh, he's a better receiver than we really thought, right? So for me, I look at those guys and go, hey, guys that I've been looking at and saying, those guys can be really good there. I was fascinated by Fannin because I was just like, so he's really just out here as a receiver, right? Like, this is not really a tight end. He's really out here as a receiver. Yet, the way they used him at Bowling Green, very similar to the way that Coastal Carolina used Isaiah Likely. And I was big on Isaiah Likely when he came out. Now I do think Likely is a better athlete than Fannin. Right? So that becomes a thing. But as far as sure-handedness and ability to, or craftiness, how to figure out where the openings are when he's running routes, like he just has he has a kind of uncanny sixth sense about it to be able to just find a way to get open, right? Like targets are one thing. Yeah, they can throw you the ball, but you being able to bring in those targets is an entirely different thing. So between those guys, I'm just like, there's a star within there somewhere, right? I do think Warren has the easiest path to start him.
I think yes,
he's going to have the easiest path to start him. I don't think he's the greatest blocker in the world, but his willingness to block is going to help him. But then his dynamics and his understanding of the play, based off of the fact that he probably still in his mind has a quarterback's brain, right? So I think he has the easiest path. I think Loveland is a boom or bust. Like, Loveland's one of those dudes who he could be really good, or he can end up being like, Hurst, right? Like, who knows, right? So I think he's the biggest boom or bust. Fannin is going to matter what system he goes to and how they use him. Gunnar Helm, I think, will be a surprise because he can block and he's able to give you that extra bit. But my sleeper of the draft, just in any position, and I know you haven't done anything with him because he doesn't play one of those four positions, but Willie Lampkin, the center guard from North Carolina, who's like all of 5'10", 5'11", 275 pounds. Everyone is just like, yeah, he's not going to be anything. Watch this guy like fool around and end up as a fullback on with the 49ers, or the fullback with the Ravens, and they bring him in and say, hey, we're just going to give you a chance and see if you can do this. Because nowadays, if you're a fullback in the NFL, you're a guard. You just a guard lined up in the backfield. And this guy was so effective, so highly effective against NFL caliber players, that it's ridiculous to me that people think that he won't have an opportunity to be effective in the league doing something. I just want to put talent on the, I just want to put talent on the field. I don't really particularly care. I also think that Tat McMillan is a couple double cheeseburgers away from having to become Jimmy Graham. So
you go.
That's also one of those things where I'm just like, is Tat McMillan, do I really want to have him be like, because I don't think he's Mike Evans. I think there's a lot of people throwing Mike Evans out there, and I'm like, y'all really need to go back and watch Mike Evans at Texas A&M. But he's
got trouble celebrating. He has difficulty separating at
absolutely
the line of scrimmage. Yeah,
and Mike Evans never had that difficulty ever, right?
No,
but I give McMillan the credit because he brings in a lot of passes, gets a lot of passes, brings in a lot of passes, and I'm just like, why doesn't someone go on to this big dude and says, hey, a couple more cheeseburgers, right? Yeah. And we can make you this unstoppable force as an H-back, as a guy who works really more closer to the line of scrimmage. But yeah, just a couple of things that I was thinking about at the position.
Those are great. I love those. I mean, the guy that I like probably the best in this class, I mean, I have Colston Loveland my highest, but the guy that I just look at when I think I'd want him on my team is Mason Taylor, Jason Taylor's son. I just think he's smooth. He's a smooth route runner. He has catch point toughness. He's skilled after the catch. And I think there's enough there as a blocker that you can get value out of him.
That's my biggest concern. He's in my next tier of guys after those guys that I named. My biggest issue is, what is he as a blocker? Like, what is he as a blocker? What can he be as a blocker? I also thought it was really interesting that he was gone, and the next guy that they had up, I forget his name, but he's like 6'7". The backup tight end to him came in and looked phenomenal too. So then I was like, ooh, is this a situation where this is just because that position has a way of being there?
Right.
I also like a lot of those South Carolina tight end wide receiver tweeners. That are super duper athletic. These
Joshua Simons and all that. Yeah.
These 6'5", 6'6", ultra athletic, leaned out but rocked up, type of dudes that are all going to end up being tight ends or H-backs. One of the sleepers, Arondé Gatson. I think if Arondé Gatson II, if he gets his, if he continues to put weight on, he's just a little too waif for the position right now, in my opinion. But if someone gets him in there and puts a few more pounds on him, like his abilities as a receiving tight end, I would match them up with a lot of those guys out there right now.
Well, see, he can come over to my house because we can put some weight on him, because I got a dog right now that came in here, and he was definitely a box safety, but now he's Levon Kirkland. So
now he's a Mike. Now he's a Mike.
He's not just a Mike. He's Levon Kirkland.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Hey, Matt, I really do appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can follow you, where they can pick up the RSP. I guarantee you guys, you're not going to spend your money any better than to grab these two. One of them, obviously, is that football game plan draft guide. That'll be out next week. The other one is this RSP. You put both of them together and what they have, and you're going to be set for anything that you need, whether it's draft related, fantasy football related, especially if you're a dynasty person. And this is one of the things that I really like. Matt has this year's RSP, but then you can purchase all of the previous seasons RSPs for $9.99 right there on the site. So you get to see some of the things and how he thought about those people as they were coming out, and you can track for yourself how everything is going. There's a reason why people keep coming back. So yeah, like let them know everywhere they can find you at, man. I talk
Sure. No, it's good. We both do, man. And that's the fun part. We're having a good time doing it. MattWaldman.com is where you can buy the RSP. You can find me on YouTube at Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room. You can also find me on X at Matt Waldman, and then also Matt Waldman at B Sky or whatever it is for Blue Sky. You can find me on Blue Sky at Matt Waldman there as well. And I write for footballguys.com. I've been a senior staff writer there since 2009. And I've got my, you'll find my work with my podcast, Matt Waldman's RSP Cast. I've got a few going on each week, with a variety of co-hosts, and we talk about the game from different angles, fantasy and regular football. My buddy Brandon Angelo and I, he's an athletic trainer who works with pro players. He and I talk a lot of shop, and he does some good work over at Angelo's Analysis that I would recommend as well. So, again, thanks so much. And we're probably long overdue for a film room. I haven't done many film rooms lately with guests, but last time Gene and I did a film room, Gene wanted to talk about Baker Mayfield. Yeah. He was basically saying, hey, look, this guy's going to probably get off to a slow start at best. And he definitely needed a career intervention, Baker Mayfield, to
he needed to come to Jesus. He needed to come to Jesus. And a lot of the stuff that I hit him on were stuff that I felt like were personality traits that were bleeding over into his game, right?
Yep.
Like arrogance that bled over into his game, that kept him from having the consistency you would hope for a guy that people were talking about had a chance to be the number 1 overall pick. Yeah. Never want to see anyone do poorly. So happy that he's been able to resurrect his career. But I also do think this is telling, because the guy that, if you remember the guy that we were comparing him to,
Trevon Boykin,
we were having the comparison. Trevon Boykin never got that opportunity.
That's right.
Never had the opportunity to lead a team, to then fail at leading that team, get traded away, get an opportunity at another team, don't do the greatest at that team, leave, go and jump on another team, get an opportunity to play in a playoff game with that other team, then turn around, sign with your 4th team, and be gifted the quarterback job without any type of like competition or anything. Yep. Like when we talk about success, especially at that position, but definitely every position,
early pick privilege does this.
When we talk about success, there is a level of privilege that some get and some do not get. I'm happy that he is now taking advantage of that. I hope the old demons don't rear their ugly heads. Like, I hope that this is a real legitimate change in who he is, because I think if so, he could have another 10 years of success, with the way in which the game is played right now and the way he plays the game. So we'll see. I do think it's about we're overdue though. It's about time for us to get back in the lab and have some fun and talk, for hours about players.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, I appreciate you having me on. It's fun being able to chop this stuff up and talk about things the way we do. And I don't know. I think I'm going to take a little break myself. 1,200 pages of work. I think I could take a week off. I think.
Yeah, you do. You do to have a little off time. So you've earned it.
I'll see if I can do some Oklahoma drills with my dog, but he'll probably kill me.
You're probably going to lose those. Matt, once again, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending this hour plus with us. I know I normally give y'all 30 minutes, but we had to get it in. Whenever my guy Matt comes through, we're going to talk, right? And hopefully you find a lot of this stuff useful. Hopefully we gave you a couple jewels about some Colorado prospects, some other prospects to look back. Make sure you go over to the New York Giants on SI. That's where you're going to find all that news and information and things that I do over there. Hit that subscriber button here as we try to get to that next landmark, right? I'm slowly building this thing up on YouTube. Let's get to 3,000. 5,000 before the start of the new season. So let's make sure we get there. Until next time, I'm Coach Gene Clemons, and I've got a giant issue.